welcome to One Idjit's Thoughts on Podcast. I'm Paul Mackey. This is going out during the dog days of Advent, but it's not quite time for my Advent content just yet. If you're listening to this on the Mondo feed and you don't know what I usually do here, this should be a good sample. I'm watching TV shows, mostly older shows, and each episode I'll give you my thoughts along with other esoterica about details of the show and the time period it was made. And if you're a regular listener, this is an excellent time to go over to dogdaysofpodcasting.com and get listening to the Dog Days of Advent 2024 Mondo feed. You'll hear every episode from every contributor over the season. If you start now, you'll get a gradual ramp-up into the Advent season. So far, we've only had announcements from Mark Kilfoyle and myself telling you more is to come this month. And then Craig Stepp, Chuck Tomasi, and Chris A. Moody appear to be the only ones attempting the full 24 Podcast Today episodes. So until I get my trivia quiz underway on the 13th, I'm here to talk about the Rockford Files Season 1, Episode 21, Just by Accident, originally aired February 28, 1975. That day of note, my source tells me there was a nuclear test conducted at the Nevada test site, and Wikipedia backs that up. Of course, all tests were underground at this point in history. During Operation Bedrock, the top gallant blast was conducted a 120 kiloton explosion in an underground shaft. Sadly, I can't point to cheerier news across the pond. On that date, there was a tube accident at Moorgate Station. A train failed to stop or even to slow, and this being a line terminus, crashed through the line terminus fail-safes and into a wall. 43 were killed and 73 injured. The local girls' school was on holiday, so many who would normally be riding were not, but this accident is still considered the worst peacetime accident on the London Underground. So, on to the arts. In theaters, The Towering Inferno remained number 1 at the box office. In the UK music charts, the top 5 singles were number 5, The Secrets That You Keep by Mud, number 4, Sugar Candy Kisses by Mac and Katie Kissoon, number 3, Please Mr. Postman by The Carpenters, number 2, January by Pilot, and number 1, like the previous week, is Make Me Smile, Come Up and See Me by Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel. In the U.S., according to the Billboard Hot 100, the top 5 singles were number 5, Some Kind of Wonderful by Grand Funk, number 4, My Eyes Adored You by Frankie Valli, number 3, Black Water by the Doobie Brothers, number 2, Have You Never Been Mellow by Olivia Newton-John, and number 1, Best of My Love by the Eagles. So now let's get a brief summary of the episode Just by Accident. Following a demolition derby event, 2 guys get into an intentional car crash in the woods. One of the drivers, Billy Joe Hartman, said earlier he was quitting and was expecting a much milder accident, but he plunges down a hillside and dies in a fiery wreck. Rockford is hired by the victim's mother, Louise Hartman, as the police have ruled the cause of death accidental and closed the case. Rockford discovers Billy Joe had a life insurance policy with his mother as beneficiary and another woman, Jeannie Simzik, as a contingent beneficiary. Billy Joe had a secret apartment, and he lived there with his other woman. After a conversation with a Polish friend, Rockford discovers that Jeannie Simzik mispronounced her own last name. It turns out she was living with him posing under a false identity, and Billy Joe had 4 false IDs in his safe deposit box. Jim checks out the Springfield Insurance Agency, and we see behind the scenes that Mr. Springfield is orchestrating multiple insurance frauds, using accomplices posing as other people, and Dwayne Bailey, the surviving driver from the opening crash sequence, is in on it. Rockford looks up the names of the fake IDs with the police, and the records all come up clean. Springfield asks Bailey to take care of Rockford for good. Rockford is forced into a car crash, but survives to continue the investigation. He sees the doctor in his care, wrapping up some unrelated paperwork, a death certificate, and he asks where that certificate and also birth certificates go, and the doctor says they all go to the County Bureau of Vital Statistics. Jim goes there and checks out the names from the fake IDs in the death records and confirms all the identities were from children who died as infants. He even verifies Jeannie Simzik was a name with a similar story. Then he finds that all the fake identities were recently awarded large insurance claims. He arranges to meet with Springfield to talk about what he found, and Springfield has his secretary tell Jim that he could be found at the racetrack. Springfield then tells Bailey they need to finish the job on Rockford. At the track, they get Jim into a little improvised demo derby and then add in some gunplay, but Sergeant Garvey and his men rush in to the rescue. On the way to Jeannie Simzik's apartment, Rockford lays out the mechanisms of the fraud scheme for Garvey.
This is Jim Rockford. At the tone, leave your name and message. I'll get back to you.
This is Thelma Sue Binkley. It's about the research I called you about, the family tree. Did you talk to your daddy? We maybe can.
Who is? It was fun seeing Gordon jump as the used car salesman. I believe the actor will join us once more in Season 2 as a different character before heading off to Cincinnati. There are a lot of other familiar faces in this episode. Fred Sadoff as Mr. Springfield, the insurance agent fraudster, already appeared earlier in the season. In Episode 6, This Case is Closed. Stephen Keats as Dwayne Bailey I've seen a lot of places, I think. For example, in a Season 2 episode of Moonlighting called Sleep Talking Guy. David Spielberg as Sergeant Garvey, the cop helping Rockford out, I've seen a lot over the years, including a couple of episodes back in the Charlie Harris at Large episode. I guess Joe Santos must have needed some time off from the Becker role. So today I'm going to look at Neva Patterson, who played Mrs. Hartman. Neva Patterson was born in 1920 in Nevada, Iowa, and worked as secretary in Des Moines before moving to New York City in 1938, initially also working as a secretary. She began singing and acting initially on radio before acting on Broadway starting in 1947, where she had credits through the late 70s. On film, she had roles in An Affair to Remember, Desk Set, All the President's Men, the Buddy Holly story, Star 80, and the Steve Martin comedy, All of Me. Her real bread and butter, however, was on television, starting with roles on TV series NBC Presents and Lights Out, both in 1949. She was a series regular on The Governor and J.J., Nichols, Doc Elliott, and had a part that spanned both original V miniseries in the 1980s. She was also a character actress with a great many one- or two-episode shots. From the 40s into the 90s, she had a total of 117 IMDb credits on television and film. Neva Patterson passed away in 2010 at the age of 90. This aged poorly. This was actually an interesting rabbit hole that I went down for unfortunate reasons, as you will see. In the scene on the construction site, Mrs. Hartman is seen berating a worker and then explains that the Seneca are the best high-steel workers there are. There were a couple of things that struck me about this scene, and I'll get to the poorly aged part at the end. Of course, the people of the Mohawk Nation are the ones often cited as the best high-steel workers. It's true the Mohawk Nation takes pride in their heritage of working high-rise construction, but I was unaware of the Seneca. After a little light research, I found that many nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, known by many as the Iroquois Confederacy, were known to work in the building of many of the towers of the Northeast, and the Mohawk and Seneca people are both members of the Haudenosaunee. So today I learned that more than only the Mohawk people were involved historically in the high-rise construction trade. The part that aged poorly is that the reason she was berating the workers was her assertion that they were all hard drinkers and had too much the night before. Artifactoids. At the gas station, Jim has an exchange with the attendant before heading to the payphone.
Hey, fill it up, Ethel. My name ain't Ethel. A gas station joke. Gee, it's priceless.
I'm guessing this quip only makes sense to a small portion of people. Clearly, the kind of gas is called ethyl, but I had no specific idea what that was. The term ethyl was a shortening of tetraethyl lead, an anti-knocking compound common to gasoline beginning from its development in the 1920s. As early as 1924, some journals were asking questions about the risk of airborne microscopic particles of lead everywhere. The articles I looked at seemed to say the introduction of the catalytic converter for emissions necessitated lead-free alternatives pretty much just as the Rockford Files series was getting underway. The ethyl gag is a much older joke, though, as early on gas with the additive was more expensive, a premium option. Abbott Costello had a joke about putting ethyl in the car, even. Getting lead additives out of gasoline worldwide was a long project, and different countries phased it out at different rates. The UN Environment Program announced in 2021 it was officially eliminated worldwide. Oh, and an additional fact, the original development of the tetraethyl lead compound for use in gasoline was done by chemical engineer Thomas Midgley Jr. Considering the damaging effects of his invention, maybe he should be looked up to for different pioneering work. How about when he made breakthroughs in the product known as Freon, using CFCs? Ozone layer. Well, I guess that didn't go very well either, huh? What worked? I like the full explanation of the identity theft scheme. I think it's a pretty well-known form of fraud at this point, but I'm betting it wasn't a fully developed trope at this point. Fraud.com calls it a Day of the Jackal fraud, after Frederick Forsyth's 1971 novel of that title. Obviously, it was easier to pull when most of those records were solely available in books of papers, as seen in the episode. They didn't have computers doing the work yet, and the clerk points out the logistical nightmare in this episode. I also appreciated that when Springfield told Bailey to take care of Jim, he took in the request and looked like he had an internal struggle about the order. So often on this show and others like it, there's an evil guy with evil henchmen who carry out the evil orders. It was refreshing to see some nuance out of Stephen Keats as Bailey. What didn't work? Well, I was pretty confused about what the drivers were up to in the beginning, but I think that's probably as intended. It's a feature, not a bug. It did a good job of following Rockford through the steps of the investigation, but I think it came out a bit dry despite all the crashes and explosions in the episode. I wonder next episode whether the magic reset button that gets pushed after each TV episode of the period has the power to resurrect Jim's Firebird. Or does Jim's Firebird resurrect itself? So next time, the Rockford Files Season 1, Episode 22, Roundabout. This will be the season finale for the first season, and I really don't know what to expect. I don't expect to see a cliffhanger that will be resolved in the Season 2 opener. I also don't expect the tragic death of a series regular or even a recurring guest. I'm not sure how much of an event they'll make of it. Will there be bigger guest stars, more action, or will it just be another episode of the Rockford Files suitable to be plugged in on a week when they need a rerun, or as part of an eventual syndication package? I guess we'll just have to watch, and until then, happy hunting. You've been listening to the One Idjit's Thoughts On podcast, produced by Paul Mackey in association with Nimlas Studios. Any short clips of audio from shows is included under fair use for commentary purposes, and copyright for that content remains with its original copyright holders. The theme song is Too Good by Jack Mangan and is used by his generous permission. One Idjit's Thoughts is produced under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. You can find more episodes of this podcast and many other fine podcasts at nimlas.org. You can contact me by emailing idjitcastpodcast@gmail.com or commenting on episodes at nimlas.org. I suppose that Freddie, the used car salesman judging Mrs. Hartman for wearing pants, didn't age very well either, did it?